Great. So thanks everybody for coming back from the break. And I encourage you to stay in the room after my talk because it will get much more interesting. We have something, I will not be playing either the keyboard or the saw, but we'll look forward to something different when I'm done. So let's see, and I should also check the time so I don't go too very long. So, all right, so I gave the introduction this morning. I'm Adam Farquhar, and I'm head of digital scholarship here. And Mahendra asked me to spend a bit of time this afternoon and kind of reflect on some of the things we've learned during the course of the labs the last couple of years. And I'll try to do that. And let's see, is that, yeah, here we go, an outline. And I'll also try to pick up a couple of other things. So the labs operates in a context, right? Both an internal and an external one. And I want to try to pick out a couple of things from that external context and a couple of things from the internal one to sort of show the things that we're doing to kind of keep pace with the rapidly changing environment, both in terms of reader behavior and our digital collections. Reflect a little bit on some of the competitions and experiments, and then try to pull out some lessons from that, and maybe some ideas about what would be interesting going forward. I'm going to take Ben's advice really seriously and avoid the counsel of perfection throughout my talk, so that way we'll be able to get started and get done. Let's see. Sorry, I have to pick the right button. Is it going to work? Yeah. Okay. So this summer, actually, we completed a survey, 2004 sort of digital scholarship survey, and the goal there was to improve our understanding of digital research behavior. We'd done this before in 2011, and so that gives us a couple of years where we can try to pull out some interesting changes. We've had enough time for some changes to happen. Quite a substantial number of folks represented, about 1,600, a bit over 1,600 participants, majority female, most of them academic, about half of them, and of those, about 32% were postgrads, and the rest were faculty and so on. Mostly registered readers. It's probably a side effect of how we asked the questions and got to people. We put it up on our website, we pointed it to people on mailing lists and so on. From the disciplinary perspective, as is sort of a pretty typical profile for the British Library, so majority was arts and humanities, a very substantial number of folks in social sciences, and then a smaller but substantial number of folks in the STEM sciences, science, technology, engineering, medicine. If we look at it geographically, majority from London, not majority, but the largest minority was from London, about 40%, about 35% from elsewhere in the UK, and substantial numbers of folks from outside, about a quarter coming from outside the UK, of which the largest representation was from North America, in fact. So we were pleased by some things. So we were pleased that 90% of the people who responded would recommend the library. So that was excellent. And quite interesting, over 80% said the library plays an important role in digital research. So good or bad, that's really important there is the difference we saw from 2011. So in 2011 to 2014, we saw actually a threefold increase in the recognition of the British Library as a very important site for supporting digital research. So very pleased by that, and also quite interested by it as you can see on that graph perhaps the shape of the curve has shifted from a kind of peak at quite important but very substantial bars on either side, shifting high and to the right, with the majority of people noting the British Library as playing a very important role in digital research. Perhaps less good news, in some ways, about 60% of the users say they're satisfied with the British Library's digital services, So we can see a bunch of reasons why that number might not be 100%. Some of them are things that we were discussing at the end of Ben's talk before the break. I'd like to get everything. I'd like to get it now. I'd like to have it full resolution, please. And not happy when that's not what they get. Other things are quite simple and well in hand, things like Wi-Fi. It's gotten better, a lot better actually. It's been working for me today, I hope for you as well. Access on your own device, again, getting better, have plans in place for that. Better remote access to electronic services, again, improving substantially on where it was in 2011. So hopefully some of those things are well in hand. Changes in behavior. So we saw some big increases in this period. We saw a doubling of the number of our respondents who are using laptops when they're doing their research. We're not going to see that happen again. That's already up to about 80%. We saw a 4x increase in the use of smartphones, and we could say the last 3 years has really been it's the years of the tablet, right? We had a 10x increase in the use of tablets among the respondents to the survey. That's still, of those three, laptop, smartphone, and tablet, the smallest at about 30%, but a really, really major change. Virtually everybody now comes into the library with more than one device. So big changes there. In spite of that big change, we still see research mainly being done on textual material. There are a bunch of reasons for that. One is that it's quite accessible, it's meaningful, it's important. But others are that, I'm expecting to see that change a bit over the next 5 years. And that's partly because our non-textual collections are growing rapidly. It's partly because they're more accessible now within the reading rooms than they've ever been before, and that will continue to increase. And it's partly that shift of interest from the 17th and 18th and 19th century to the late 19th and 20th century. And the 20th century, that's the AV century. That's the one where we have really comprehensive audio and video collections, many of those components being unique, and many of them accessible only in a small number of locations. So that's something that I expect will change a little bit. I don't expect it not to be the major source of material that people do in research, but I'm expecting an increase in the rate. Then things that people know about has also changed a lot, and I found it quite reassuring. So 1 in 2 were aware of things like data wrangling and scripting. Anyone who does any work with data of any sort knows that this kind of cleansing, rearranging, fixing it is essential, and we're seeing many more people aware of that. 1 in 3 claim that they use data or textual analysis as part of their research, and nearly 1 in 6 say they've used programming as part of their research work. And we kind of had some discussions with the team. Is that a lot or is that a little? Could go either way. Actually, from my perspective, that's huge. That's not something I would have expected to be the case of the British library reader community. So I think that's, I found it actually quite encouraging. Other sorts of changes in behavior, well, maybe some non-changes. I remember when we did that survey in 2011 and thinking back where our heads were back then, less than half of the readers had laptops, 10% had a smartphone, but we were really expecting this huge transformation in the way people did research. We were expecting everybody to be collaborating. We were talking about services so you could walk through the reading room and automatically find people interested in the same subjects you were interested in, all these sorts of things. And back then, we got a bit of pushback from the users. From the readers, they said, actually, I'm just sitting here by myself. I don't really want to share that much. And that's still the case. So that number is about the same. About 16% report doing research in collaboration, or put the other way, 84% aren't. So that being said, we have seen a big uptick in the use of things like social media. So social media, blogging, microblogging, or tweeting to share research findings and interests, we contextualized it in that way, have all increased substantially. So that's an important change in research behavior, but it might be quite a bit lower than many of us expect it to be. So what is that? It's around 40% are using social networks, about 20% are, say, tweeting about their research. Sometimes it feels like that's all anybody does. Who knows what's happening in this room today? But actually that number is relatively modest in many ways. There are a couple of things that struck us as we were looking at the survey results. About a third of the people said they have publications stored in a digital repository, which is great, but nearly half of them actually didn't know whether they were or not, or if they had it there, if it was accessible from it, which was interesting. I think it's not so much a message for us, but it's an interesting message for the folks providing infrastructure in the UK and folks at universities and university libraries, thinking that people get what their digital repositories are about and are doing. Then, as now, we saw high awareness of copyright issues for digital resources. There are some questions I think we have around that. So that was high self-asserted awareness. We didn't test people and see whether they got the numbers right. That would be a different activity than we took there. So I guess the headlines from this digital scholarship survey and this changes are, big improvements in the perception of the library and the role it plays in the digital research sphere, and big advances amongst the readers and participants in the use of digital devices, digital technology, and digital methods. So I don't think either, we like to think neither of those are surprising, but actually the first one was quite reassuring. We'd had no guarantees that that was the case going into the survey. Okay, so the British Library's physical collections, a lot of you will be aware of, right? World-class, extensive, comprehensive in some areas, covers every language, every format, every subject about which people have written or sung or tweeted or drawn or spoken, going back quite a ways. And for the last, since about 1999, we've been digitizing bits of that and making them available in some important ways, in digital as well as physical form. And I think the previous talks have mentioned Peter Francois, who was our labs winner last year. He helped us to understand some of the caveats there, in particular reminding us, you've only digitized less than 2%, and that's been driven by considerations that are unrelated to the kind of representative sampling you might like for research activities. It's been driven by things like money and conservation needs, and a whole range of topical interests, the desire to actually digitize things that were not part of the standard corpus, but were perhaps outside of it, for instance. If we look at the size of our digital collection, it's been growing really rapidly. This is a graph of the number of items in our digital library since about 2006. And you can see the number now is getting on to 9 million, okay? So these numbers are quite funny, and I'll say something about that in a second, but that's, no matter what way you look at it, that's a quite substantial amount of material in digital form. This graph actually substantially underrepresents the quantity of digital content, and it underrepresents, really the number of items by any reasonable metric. So, for instance, a single book is an item, even though it might contain hundreds of digitized images, digitized pages, which contain potentially thousands of digital images, which we've released in a million, as a collection of 1 million images on Flickr, right? So we're not counting the images, we're not counting the pages, this is counting the books. A journal issue might be counted as a single item, whereas actually the articles are what's important, and we could have counted the articles individually. The biggest offender here, is Helen in the room still? The biggest offender here is probably the web archive, which very sensibly bundles things together. So it has, how big's a WARP file? 150 megabytes?
Last macro we had 2.2 billion.
No, the WARP file size.
The WARP file size.
1 gig. Okay, so a single item on this count could be a 1 gigabyte file that has tens of thousands of web pages and hundreds of websites embedded in it. Okay, so it's quite severely undercounting the number of items. Another way you can look at it is the volume, so the gigabytes don't lie. This is a graph of the gigabytes in the archive over the last 8 years. And the total now is about 450 terabytes, so 450,000 gigabytes of digital content. That's about, how do you count those things, right? It's about 100,000 DVDs, all full. If you stack those up, they'd be about 1.5 times the height of the Shard. Is that meaningful? Not really, but it's a thing. I figured it out last night. Yes, exactly. And that, in some sense, that's an interesting number. It also undercounts in a couple of interesting ways. One is that a lot of that material is compressed, sometimes quite severely. Again, the web content is a good example of that. It's also just from the perspective of how much storage space actually is required. We don't have just one copy of this stuff, right? That would be quite risky. We have 4 copies. We have one in London, one in Yorkshire, one in Wales, one in Scotland. And each of those nodes has slightly more than one copy of everything and has about 1.3 copies of everything because of the way the storage technology works. So that total amount of disk storage is probably on the order of 2 petabytes, something like that. Another way of thinking about this in perspective is, and this is important for researchers, especially ones who want to download lots of images, once you get out of the machine room, that becomes a lot of content, right? So if you're sitting at your office, you might have a 100 megabit line, would be pretty good. If you ran that at 100%, that gives you about 1 terabyte a day. So it would take you about 1.5 years to download that content, if you had a place to put it, to download it over a kind of standard high-speed line that would be fully dedicated to it. And that's actually a real and serious obstacle to research. It means we have to do some tricks in order to let people do interesting things with content. So the previous 2 slides have really emphasized volume and number of items. Actually, the most interesting thing is really the variety. And Mahendra has picked up on this a bit already. There's a huge range of things in those digital collections, both in our digital library system and outside of it. So they're data sets. Some are bibliographic, but some of them are not, such as the georeferencing information of tens of thousands of cartographic items. There are many images, manuscripts I mentioned, audio-video material. The newspaper collection, we now have about 9 million pages of digitized newsprint in the British Newspaper Archive. Archived web material, was it 80 terabytes? You mentioned the number this year, is it 80 terabytes?
Last year was 31.
31 terabytes, added together, get 81, 71. Tens of millions of journal articles, hundreds of thousands of theses, and we've seen people start to work with these. We saw that great talk earlier today about working with audio recordings, with music recordings, things like playbills. It's a huge range, and basically anyone who's doing any kind of research that touches on or needs content will find some of what they need, a large portion perhaps of what they need in those collections. So I've mentioned now two things. I've mentioned that the change in the external environment, what do readers want, what do researchers need, and a bit about what's going on with the digital environment, what's going on with this stuff. That puts quite a bit of pressure on us, right? So our staff, including our curatorial staff, who are used to working with folks who have wanting things from the physical collections, are now increasingly confronted with supporting them in a digital environment. And we've been trying to react and to act to keep pace with those changes. We put in place, to do that, we put in place a digital scholarship training program. Been running for, so what is it, a year and a half now? About 2 years, actually. In fact, 2 years probably today. And it's got a catalog that we've designed of about 15 one-day courses that cover a wide range of topics in digital scholarship and in related areas. And we run them, most of them are run in London, but some also in our second site in Boston Spa. They're taught by a combination of internal and external instructors, so we have internal expertise, we do it, but we also bring people in to make the quality stay high. These are some of the things that we teach. Let's see, so digital scholarship, digital collections, digitization, kind of the basics. We also have some fairly advanced topics, cleaning up data, metadata, foundations of working in digital objects like images or AV material. New this year is managing digital research information. We try to refresh it. In fact, we've seen that as we've gone on, some things we did early on no longer necessary to be done in this kind of advanced way. Things like social media, we don't teach a course on social media anymore. That's kind of integrated. Presentation, we don't do a course on presentation skills anymore. That's picked up elsewhere. I think one of the interesting notes is we changed the title of the first one from What is Digital Scholarship? When we started out, it was like, what is it really? Actually, now we kind of think we've got a very good, effective working notion of what digital scholarship is and what it's about, and we just do it and we tell people. All of our courses have big hands-on components with practical elements to them. Feedback from participants show that they love that. As you might expect. And they also value not just what they learn, but the opportunity to sit and talk with colleagues from other departments, from other areas, who might have the same problem, but with a different form, maybe the same problem with a solution, and so on. I think I'll pick up on the next slide. One of the things that I think has been really interesting is the introduction of some kind of basic programming and scripting skills. And it's been, I think, really empowering to some of our staff. So we don't expect people to become software developers or software engineers necessarily, but we have sort of a more modest goal in mind, and that's to help people understand some things that are possible and to enable them to do more themselves and to solve some problems themselves. So with just a little bit of scripting techniques, understanding that what the command line is, these sorts of things open up the categories of problems that you can address yourself directly. We've been using some pilot services that I love were deployed universally, but some pilot service that lets people access content from the digital library system as if it's sitting in their file system, right? So that's incredibly empowering because it means you can take your laptop, your desktop, or virtual machine, depending on what you need to do, and use the tools that you're used to using to take a look at the content, those images, what happened to that stuff, your digitization project. Sometimes you might be having some visitors and you like to get the super high-res versions of it that you know is buried somewhere, or the things that are available but aren't yet on one of the public services. And these sorts of back-end tools are incredibly useful for staff. It's the sorts of things they're used to doing to the physical items. They'll be able to do those with the digital items as well. So it's going pretty well. So far, so good. These are stats from 6 months ago, so we've done more than this, but we've had over 245 members of staff do these courses, which is hugely exciting for us. Average of 3 days per staff member over the last, over that 18-month period. And it's had, I think, a substantial and subtle effect on the way people are thinking about this digital content, digital collections, and the express needs of researchers when they come to the library and are asking for help and support. Okay. So I'll draw a line there and just switch and think about a little bit about some of the competitions and experiments that we've been doing over the last almost 2 years in the labs. So you've heard quite a bit about it from Mahendra, and you've heard about some of the really cool projects that we've been able to do with people. And I wish I could, I need to bottle Tim's opening remarks. I think we've actually got it bottled up there because they really express better than I have ever been able to do why we're involved in this activity and why it's important to us. So example from last year, it's come up before. So Ben gave an extended discourse on Peter, but and his work is in the room somewhere, at least was this morning. He did this work with us when he was a postdoc at Oxford. Now he's at Hertfordshire as well, as associated with his institute in Oxford. And he really helped us to see and understand the nature of our digital collections in a way that we could have done before, I guess, but we just hadn't really focused on it. And it was this graph, right, that really forces you to think, digital, have to think about it differently. It's a non-representative sample. You have to think about the techniques you use differently. Quite influential. Another one that's been mentioned at greater length previously is the big data experiment we've done with UCL. And I think it was important for us in a couple of ways. So first, it was a good collaboration. It was very effective, a great team at UCL, and really engaged, bright, knowledgeable students. But it was also one of our first attempts to work with, in this case, students at the master's level with computing backgrounds at dealing with content at scale. And there are a couple of things there. One was they got turned on to some of the humanities research challenges and topics, which is quite interesting for us to see, and I think for them. And on the other side, we gained a sort of confidence that this sort of potentially quite exotic feeling infrastructure, the Microsoft Azure cloud, was something that actually you could, with a little bit of support, have a bunch of master's students make use of and exploit in a very effective way. And that kind of capacity is absolutely essential if organizations like the British Library are ever going to try to support the needs of a substantial set of people across the UK HE. So we can't support more than a few researchers with our internal infrastructure. We have to have a totally different way of scaling it so that it can be used at the undergraduate level, at the master's level, as well as the postgrad level. Another lovely example that's come up a couple of times was David Normal at the Crossroads of Curiosity and his artwork that he did at Burning Man. I'm going to see if we can play a short video and
I'm David Normal. I'm from San Francisco, California. I'm a visual artist. My work has always revolved around collage elements. While I do paint and draw, I use collage in the way that I think. So my thinking revolves around juxtaposition. And I have a strong interest in old sources of collage material, such as 19th century imagery. This is my first time at the British Library, and my impression is that It's one of the largest libraries on earth. And I consider libraries really sacred places. I heard about the British Library's Flickr Commons collection from the guitarist of the punk band Flipper. I was looking for 19th century collage collection, and I had a project underway where I wanted to use that type of imagery specifically, so it was really serendipitous. It was beyond my wildest dreams, really. I mean, unbelievable. I've always been drawn to 19th century illustration because I've admired the craftsmanship. The draftsmanship is exquisite. There's something about it that's so romantic. Those types of engraved images were the stand-in for photographs. So I used the gallery function of Flickr so that I could come back to them later, because I wanted at all times to keep track of, where these images were from, so I knew which books they were from. I didn't want to just take an image and then have it be bereft of its source material completely. It's almost very entrancing because you have to sit there and stare at image after image after image, and they kind of literally flicker by. The project for Burning Man and the intention to work with 19th century images existed in my mind before I was aware of the British Library Flickr Commons collection. Burning Man's theme for 2014 was caravansary. So it was decided to make something called a crossroads of curiosity. And the idea was to take the notion of a cabinet of curiosities and expand it outward from the rectilinear arrangement of objects in a case to this series of tableaux of human dramas, like a kind of collection of strange things and incidents that are occurring at a crossroads of experience. And so that's why we called it Crossroads of Curiosity. What I made for Burning Man was what I call an epic suite of paintings that were created at the original size of 3 feet by 8 feet. What made the epic, though, was that they were reproduced at a scale of 8 feet by 20 feet as light boxes, which were then arrayed around the base of the Burning Man statue. The building of it was done by a team of carpenters, and at a certain point, the project really kind of left my control. The 4 3-foot by 8-foot paintings were made in 10 weeks. However, the collages were done earlier. It probably took 40 or more hours on each collage. Overall, the reaction to my work at Burning Man was fascination. People were very surprised and perplexed by them. People were very eager to know what the images meant and to understand the story of them, to understand the symbolism of the images and understand how the different pieces related to each other, and also understand how it related to the theme of caravansary. The fact that the images are separated from the books, and so they kind of are on their own, out of context, and this creates this strong potential to reinvent them in a new context. It's very satisfying to actually touch the books. I didn't want to make a work of art that was simply a Burning Man genre piece, so I specifically thought about how to make the pieces be their own world, their own statement, their own aesthetic. Working with the British Library's material was very empowering for that, because it not only did it give me this immense amount of material to work with, but it also gave me a point of reference to a completely different, institution. In that way, the title, Crossroads of Curiosity, really was very self-fulfilling, because it became a crossroads of two very different paths of very different organizations.
So that was David and the Crossroads of Curiosity. Almost as wonderful has been the Off the Map work, and I don't know if she was here earlier, I don't know. So there she is, excellent. So you can catch her afterwards. So I just wanted to mention that. So this is also being run in this competition fashion. Off the Map is something that we do in conjunction with Game City, who run a major video game conference and festival here in the UK, and with Crytek, who does CryEngine, which is a video game building engine. And we put them together with interesting digital content from the British Library, and they do absolutely amazing things. We set a theme and a challenge each year. Last year's winners were fantastic. This year's winners also fantastic. They were announced just last week. In fact, Rolly, our CEO, was there for the ceremony, as was Stella. And I'll also take 2 minutes, if that's okay, and I will play the video of the this year's winners. Let's see if this works. Fantastic sort of fly-through of their game world, inspired by materials that we had provided related to Fonthill Abbey. And a thing that we don't get from this version of it is actually implemented using Oculus Rift, which is the sort of 3D headset. And it should be, even if you don't get a headache from the 3D headset and you have binocular vision, it should be even more astounding. So a lovely thing about that work is how it's engaging a new generation of people with historical content and mixing in some amazing technology and artwork as well. I guess I get to say this. Off the Map 2015 will be launched in December, so there'll be a launch event. There's a URL if you want to book a place, and the theme will be Alice's Adventures Off the Map. So we'll be interested to see how that works out, and that mix of real and unreal locations. So I thought I will. Let's see, where's my watch? I'm going to go about 7 minutes long because we started a couple minutes late, and then I will pass on to Sarah. So I thought I'd try to articulate a couple of lessons that I think we have gotten from the work that we've done. So 5 of them, really. So the first one is just, more is more, right? And by that, it's about digital content. the more digital content we've got, the more accessible it is, the better it is. Without that, you can't do digital scholarship and digitally driven research. And that's bloody hard work. One of the big things that's happened in the last 18 months, so April 2013, is that the long-awaited non-print legal deposit regulations finally came into place. That gives us the ability to collect legal deposit material published in non-print forms in the UK, which is fantastic. There are some caveats and strings attached, many strings, which make it sometimes less fantastic for research purposes as we would like it to be, but nonetheless an amazing thing, and it will be the basis of the national digital collection in 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years to come. We also do a huge amount of digitization. Some of that is in partnership, and that innovative partnership and fundraising is absolutely key to making more digital content. So some great examples, D.C. Thompson, Family History. We're going to do 40 million pages of historic newspaper with them. On the British Newspaper Archive today, there are over 9 million pages. Interesting subtext there, if we think about what Bob was trying to do and talked about the Victorian Mail Machine. We saw some of those interfaces. They're great, but you know what? Nobody was thinking some guy was going to come along and build a database of Victorian jokes with them. And this is one of the challenges that we have to deal with as well. We've done the largest current project at the moment is with Google. We've done about 100,000 volumes plus out of 250,000 plus we're planning. That will be a substantial resource. Ben and Mahendra mentioned the work that we did with Microsoft several years ago. We digitized about 25 million pages with them, and that's the basis for that 65,000 volume collection. And that was one of the really remarkable things about that is the generous conditions of reuse. So with public domain, anyone can do whatever they want to with it. And as you've seen during the course of today, they are. There's some amazing research value, commercial value, and creative value being extracted from that content. So amazing what happens when things are open and freely accessible. That's why we often love philanthropic donations. We do a lot of large-scale digitization projects driven by philanthropic money. A good current example of that just launched over the last, it was the week before last, the Gulf History Portal, done in collaboration with the Qatar National Library and Qatar Foundation, makes a large quantity of material never before digitized available for a broad range of research purposes. I think that growth in digital collections, that's real and it's substantial. And also the growth of expectations on the part of researchers towards openness and access is also real and substantial. We sometimes struggle to meet all the expectations, but I think the trend here is really, really, really positive. Second, we say less is more, and I'm really thinking about tools and services that we provide here, right? So digital scholarship, digital humanities, there's pretty good consensus about some of the approaches and the methods. There's not good consensus on tools, and you know what? That's really okay. It's not our job, certainly, to pick winners in that space, and it would be, this is a time to see them flourish, and we do see them flourish. But that can be a bit in conflict with the way we, as an organization, think about designing and delivering tools and services. The British Newspaper Archive is kind of a case in point. You know, they thought they talked to people, they talked to researchers, they knew exactly what they wanted, they built a system that would meet the needs. But not everybody's needs. And the answer isn't to work harder to deliver a more perfect system. The answer is to deliver people worse systems that provide more access to more content. And that's, I think, the consensus. That's the thing that we've has come through really strongly to me as we've done the BL Labs project. And we have some, I think, some pretty good ideas about how to make that happen at this point. But given the time, I won't spend a lot of time telling you about them until the break. Third lesson I think we've learned is people need to bring their own tools. We can't force people to use things. You know, we saw some great tools. We heard about being used today. We saw some things that I'd never thought about people using for audio analysis. Fantastic, beautiful, beautiful stuff. The British Library is never going to build those tools. We're not going to build, you know, SPSS or R either. We need to let people pick and choose and use the tools that they want to use with the content that we happen to be the custodians of. Fourth lesson is we've got to let people be creative. So that partly means, you know, those big examples of creativity, as we saw with David Normal's work, but that also means at every level for everybody who's dealing with the digital content, we can't be prescribing to people what their workflow should be or what they're going to do with the content. We need to put in place tools and services that let people create new things and new meaning from their own work. And lastly, we need also to support people in starting small and then, you know, growing and finishing huge. So you can't start with 1 million Victorian jokes. It's hard to start with 25 million pages or 65,000 books even. It's quite easy to start with 5 books, 50 books, 150. Those small samples that you can work with, develop your techniques, refine them, and then say, all right, let's roll it out to the whole thing. Now let's move it into an environment where we can deal with the entire collection of millions of objects potentially. And again, I think that 10 years ago that was an impossibility. Today it's a relatively straightforward challenge. I think taken together, those ideas really are prescription for our radical change. It's a radical retooling in the way that libraries and other content holders think about delivering services, think about delivering content. You know, we have to make these shifts, and when we do it, we'll not only find that we're supporting researchers, which is super important, but also our own curatorial staff, as we saw with that example from the programming librarian, our collection care staff. We're going to be able to enable people like Peter Ballmer to improve the development of innovative third-party services, commercial activities, build businesses on them. That's great as well. And we'll find that when we come to build our own services, that it's much easier because we've layered it in a way that enables other people to do that as well. I think 5 years ago, impossible. Now most of the pieces are in place. You've got scalable storage, fast networking, virtual machine infrastructures. These are the components that, when put together in the right way, should enable us to provide services like that. And we're not the only one trying to do it. There's some good worked examples out in the world. One of the lovely examples for me is the European Bioinformatics Institute and their Embassy Cloud. They let people come in and do novel, sometimes proprietary analysis of public data, and that's the kind of approach that we also need to be taking here. And it will take a while. It's a different way of providing services. It's a different class of infrastructure, but with the right partners and the right thoughts, I think we'll see it happen. And we'll see a new type of infrastructure emerging to support digital research and digital scholarship over the coming years.